Case 1. Safa, Boular. London, England, April 2017. On April 27, 2017, Metropolitan Police and MI5 officers executed an arrest as part of an operation that had been running for months. The person at the center of it was Safa Bular, 16 years old, from London, and by the time of her arrest, deep into a terrorism plot targeting the British Museum. Her case would make her one of the youngest female terrorism convicts in UK history. And the route by which she arrived at that point is a case study in how online radicalization operates on vulnerable young people. Bular had encountered Nahir Hussein through online channels. Hussein was an Islamic State recruiter and operative. He and Bular conducted what she later described as an online Islamic marriage, a relationship built entirely through digital communication with a man who had a documented history of targeting vulnerable young people in the United Kingdom. Around November 2016, Hussein proposed something to the 16-year-old. She testified about this exchange directly. He asked her if she was scared of being in an attack. She said yes. He asked her to carry one out anyway. The original plan was for Bular to travel to Syria on what she described as a suicide mission. When authorities intervened to prevent her departure, she shifted her focus. Using coded language in digital communications, Tokarev for weapons, pineapples for grenades, she began discussing a plan to attack the British Museum. She was communicating with people she believed were fellow IS supporters. They were undercover MI5 officers. What made this case genuinely disturbing to the investigators who worked it was not the ideological content. Extremist grooming operations had been documented in the UK for years. It was how ordinary Bular appeared beneath the radicalization. She had diabetes. She had experienced periods of social isolation. She had, in the accounts of people who knew her, been a teenager who could have been reached by different interventions at multiple points. The grooming had found those vulnerabilities and exploited them with precision. The wider operation that arrested Bular also resulted in the arrest of her sister Rislaine and her mother Mina Dyke, both of whom faced separate charges. At the Old Bailey, the evidence was extensive. Seized phones, intercepted communications, materials recovered from the family home, and months of documented contact with IS handlers. Bular was found guilty of plotting the museum attack and of attempting to travel to Syria to join IS. In August 2018, Judge Mark Dennis QC sentenced her to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 13 years. At sentencing, he stated that however much Bular had been influenced by others, she had known what she was doing and had acted with open eyes. No one was harmed. The plot was intercepted before it could be executed. But the operational detail of the planning, the coded language, the target selection, the communications with handlers, indicated that the threat had been real. Safa Bular's case became a reference point in UK policy discussions about online radicalization, about the grooming of minors by extremist networks, and about what intervention might look like before a 16-year-old becomes a terrorism convict. As of 2025, she remains incarcerated in a UK prison serving her sentence. Her minimum term will not expire until she is in her late 20s. If you're new here, welcome to Daily Crime Archive. This channel covers cases that deserve more than a headline. We go deep on the investigation, the legal proceedings, the victims, and the systemic questions that the initial news cycle never has time for. We are a new channel, and every subscription matters directly. Hit the button and the bell right now, if you haven't already. Drop a comment as you're watching. Tell us which of these cases you followed when it was happening. We read everything. Now, Case 2. Paris Mayo, Ross-on-Wye, Herefordshire, England, March 2019. Paris Mayo gave birth alone, at home, to a son she had concealed throughout her pregnancy. The baby, she would later name him Stanley, was alive. He did not stay alive for long. What happened in those minutes has been described in court documents in clinical terms that contain Beneath the clinical language, one of the most harrowing cases of neonaticide, the killing of a newborn within 24 hours of birth, in recent British legal history. Stanley suffered severe head injuries. Cotton wool was found in his throat. The forensic assessment of his injuries compared them to those seen in high-impact vehicle accidents. His mother placed his body in a bin bag and left it on the doorstep of the family home. Her mother found it and called emergency services. Mayo's account to investigators and to the court was that she had not known she was pregnant. She attributed the physical changes her body had undergone to weight gain. She told authorities that what happened at the birth was accidental, that she had not understood what was happening, that she had panicked. Later, in therapy during the investigation, she acknowledged a different truth. She had known. She had been in denial. She had been terrified of how her family would respond to the pregnancy. The particular anguish embedded in the therapeutic disclosure was that she acknowledged, at that point, that her mother would likely have been supportive. The fear that drove her to conceal the pregnancy, and ultimately to what happened to Stanley, was disconnected from the likely reality. The trial at Worcester Crown Court lasted 5 weeks. The prosecution's position was that this was not a case of infanticide driven by postpartum psychological disturbance, but deliberate action, that Mayo had made a decision in those minutes and had acted on it. The medical evidence regarding Stanley's injuries supported that characterization. Mayo maintained her claims of accident and ignorance throughout. The jury rejected both. Judge Mr. Justice Garnham sentenced Mayo to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 12 years. He told her directly, "You decided you had to finish Stanley off." Her defense team described her circumstances, her isolation, her lack of support, her youth, her terror, and called the sentence a life sentence in every sense, going beyond the legal minimum. Mayo serves her sentence in a UK facility. The case was raised repeatedly in the years following the verdict, in discussions about what support structures could be built around young women experiencing crisis pregnancies, particularly those in isolated or high-pressure family circumstances. Stanley lived briefly. His life ended in pain, and in the most alone circumstances imaginable for a newborn. Case 3. Maricela Diaz, Mitchell, South Dakota, 2009. Jasmine Guevara was 16 years old. She trusted people she thought were friends. On the day she was killed, she went to what she believed was a cookout. Instead, she was attacked, placed in the trunk of her own car while still alive, driven to a field in Hanson County, South Dakota, and burned to death. Maricela Diaz had been in a relationship with Alexander Salgado since early adolescence. By 2009, that relationship had developed a kind of possessive intensity that those around them recognized as unhealthy, but didn't anticipate would become lethal. When Salgado showed interest in Jasmine Guevara, Diaz's response was not to end the relationship or distance herself from Jasmine. It was to plan Jasmine's death. The luring was deliberate. The mechanism, bringing Jasmine to a location under false pretenses, was planned. The attack was carried out by both Diaz and Salgado. Jasmine was placed in the trunk of her car while she was still alive. Lighter fluid was used to ignite the vehicle. Jasmine died in the fire. The investigation moved quickly following the discovery of the car and remains. Both Diaz and Salgado were arrested in 2009. The legal proceedings became complicated. Venue changes, multiple hearings, questions about Diaz's age and how the case should be processed. She was tried as an adult. The trial did not take place until 2015, 6 years after Jasmine's death. Prosecutors described the killing as calculated and deliberate. They told the jury, Jasmine ended up burning alive. Ms. Diaz made a choice. Jasmine's mother gave testimony that broke down in the courtroom. She described learning what had happened to her daughter, the method, the circumstances, the fact that people Jasmine had trusted had done this to her. Diaz was convicted of first-degree homicide, arson, and kidnapping. Because of her age at the time of the offense, South Dakota law precluded a mandatory life sentence. She received a life-eligible term, meaning she will serve significant time before any possibility of parole consideration. As of 2025, Diaz remains incarcerated in a South Dakota prison. Jasmine Guevara was 16 years old. She thought she was going to a cookout with people she knew. 3 cases in. 10 more to go. We've covered a 16-year-old groomed online into a terrorism plot, a neo-Naticide case built around fear and isolation, and a jealousy killing where the victim was placed in the trunk of her own car while still alive. Daily Crime Archive covers these cases because the victims deserve the full story, not just a 2-minute summary that reduces what happened to a crime statistic. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit the button now. It directly affects how this channel grows and how many people find this content. 10 more cases. Let's continue. Case 4. Rachel Wade, Pinellas Park, Florida, April 2009. The voicemail had been recorded weeks before the killing. In it, Rachel Wade told Sarah Ludeman, "I'm guaranteeing you that I'm going to take you out." The voicemail was played in court in 2010. It was one of dozens of documented threats, text messages, social media posts, calls that Wade had sent to Ludeman over the preceding months. The two were 18 years old. They had both been romantically involved with a young man named Joshua Camacho, and the conflict between them had consumed their social circles, their phones, and, ultimately, one of their lives. On April 14, 2009, Ludeman drove to Wade's location after an exchange of heated calls. The confrontation that followed was witnessed. During it, Wade used a weapon, a knife, and struck Ludeman in the chest. The wound hit her heart. It was fatal. Wade was arrested within hours. Her immediate claim was self-defense. Ludeman had been the aggressor, she argued. She had only protected herself. The evidence in the case told a different story. The months of documented threats, the voicemails in Wade's own voice, the witness accounts of the confrontation, all of it pointed toward someone who had been moving toward this outcome for a long time. The jury rejected Wade's self-defense claim. She was convicted of second-degree murder, a charge that acknowledged the serious nature of the killing while recognizing it had not been planned months in advance in the way that first-degree murder requires. She was sentenced to 27 years in prison. Sarah Ludeman was 18 years old. She had a whole future in front of her. The argument that had seemed to everyone involved in it like the most important thing in the world, the love triangle, the voicemails, the social media posts, ended with her family left to grieve a loss that was entirely preventable. Wade has now spent more than a decade in a Florida correctional facility. Her projected release date is 2032. The case is studied in discussions about the escalation of teenage conflict and the role that documented threats play in cases where violence eventually follows. Friends of both young women testified that they had seen the threats, had known how serious the conflict had become, and had not believed it would actually come to this. It came to this. Case 5. Jennifer Pan, Markham, Ontario, Canada, November 2010. For years, Jennifer Pan had been lying to her parents. She had not graduated from high school. She had not attended university. She had not built a career as a pharmacist. Every element of the academic and professional life she reported to her Vietnamese immigrant parents. Parents who had worked hard, sacrificed significantly, and placed enormous emphasis on their daughter's success was fabricated. She had forged report cards. She had invented a career. She had constructed an entire fictional adult life and sustained it across years. In November 2010, the fiction collapsed. Her parents discovered the truth. The ultimatum they delivered was simple. End the relationship with her boyfriend Daniel Wong, a man they had forbidden her from seeing, and live under their rules, or leave the family with no financial support. Jennifer Pan's response to this ultimatum was to hire 3 men to stage a home invasion and kill both her parents. On the night of November 8, 2010, 3 men entered the Pan family home. They restrained Jennifer alongside her parents, establishing her as an apparent victim, and took her parents upstairs. Her mother, Bitch Pan, was shot and died from her injuries. Her father, Han Pan, was shot and survived, though the wounds left him blind. Jennifer was treated initially as a surviving victim. Police interviewed her multiple times. The inconsistencies in her account began accumulating. Her timeline didn't match the evidence. Details changed between sessions. Investigators grew increasingly suspicious and subjected her to extended interrogation. During one session, she confessed, but in a way that she framed as an attempt to have herself killed rather than her parents. The evidence said otherwise. Phone records documented her communications with the men she had hired. Financial records showed the payments. Her accomplices provided testimony. Han Pan, her father, blinded by the shooting, widowed by the same night, testified against his daughter at trial. He described the attack and his eventual understanding of Jennifer's role in it. The trial took place in 2015, 5 years after the night Bitch Pan died. Jennifer was convicted of first-degree murder of her mother and the attempted murder of her father. She received a life sentence with no possibility of parole for 25 years. In a significant development, an appeal resulted in the ordering of a retrial in 2025. Her case therefore remains open as of this year. Bitch Pan died believing she had been the victim of a random home invasion. She never knew her daughter had arranged it. Case 6. Emma Tustin, Solihull, England, June 2020. The person at the center of Emma Tustin's case is not named in the original investigation documents by first name in most of the public-facing coverage, a reflection of the specific legal protections extended to child victims in the UK. He was 6 years old. He had been living in the home of his father, Thomas Hughes, and Hughes's partner, Emma Tustin, in Solihull, West Midlands. What happened in that home, over months, and then with finality on June 16, 2020, was documented by investigators through recovered messages, medical evidence, and the accounts of neighbors who had heard things they hadn't understood at the time. The child had been subjected to isolation, systematic food deprivation, and what prosecutors and medical experts described as salt poisoning, the deliberate administration of salt in quantities designed to cause harm. He had been denied basic necessities. He had been kept away from the outside world in ways that prevented anyone outside the household from observing his deteriorating condition. Social services had been involved with the family previously. The case had been closed. That decision was later subjected to a highly critical formal review. On June 16, 2020, Tustin inflicted a head injury that killed the child. Medical evidence documented both the fatal injury and the accumulated harm of months of mistreatment. Among the evidence recovered was a message Tustin had sent to Hughes about the child. "I want you, but I don't want him." The trial established the full scope of what had happened. Tustin was convicted of murder. Hughes was convicted of manslaughter for his role in the sustained mistreatment and for enabling the conditions in which the child's death became inevitable. Tustin was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 29 years. Hughes received 24 years. The judge described the treatment of the child as cruel and inhuman. The formal review that followed the trial examined how multiple agencies had been involved with the family and had failed to identify what was happening in the household. It generated a national conversation about the gaps in safeguarding systems in England. Tustin serves her sentence at HMP Peterborough. The child who died was 6 years old. His name was Arthur Labinjo Hughes. Case 7. Valerie Parashumti, Coolbellup, Perth, Australia, June 2006. Stacey Mitchell was 16 years old. She went to the home of 2 women she considered friends. She walked into a plan that had been in place for weeks. Valerie Parashumti and Jessica Stasinowski had, by the accounts of investigators and the psychiatric evaluations that followed, bonded over a shared fascination with the idea of taking a life. This was not a vague, abstract interest. It was a specific preoccupation that they had discussed repeatedly in the weeks before June 21, 2006. They had decided to act on it. They had selected a target, not someone they had a conflict with, not someone who had wronged them, but someone accessible and trusting. Stacy Mitchell was both. She was attacked with a concrete slab. She was then strangled with a chain. The attack lasted approximately 45 minutes. After she died, her body was wrapped and placed in a wheelie bin in the backyard of the property. Parashumti and Stasinowski then continued with their lives, while Stacy's family searched for her. The discovery came when investigators, following leads about Stacy's last known movements, found her remains. Parashumti's background, as pieced together in the investigation and psychiatric evaluation, included a childhood shaped by domestic violence. Her father had been imprisoned for harming her mother, and a long-standing preoccupation with subcultures associated with darkness and harm. The psychological evaluation found a severe personality disorder. Both women had, in interviews with investigators, expressed excitement about what they had done. Both pleaded guilty. In 2008, the sentencing judge told them, "The evilness of your crime. You were aroused and excited by the act itself." Parashumti received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 24 years. Stasinowski received a similar sentence. In 2013, Parashumti made news again when she attempted to escape from custody. She was recaptured quickly. As of 2025, Parashumti remains incarcerated in an Australian prison. Her minimum term means she will not be eligible for parole consideration until at least 2032. And given the assessments on record regarding her motivations and the absence of documented remorse, parole at that point remains far from certain. Stacy Mitchell was 16. She trusted the people who killed her. 7 cases covered, 6 more to go. We've covered a Canadian daughter who fabricated her entire adult life and then arranged her parents' murder when the fiction collapsed. A 6-year-old boy in Solihull who died at the hands of a woman who sent messages saying she didn't want him. And 2 women in Perth who killed a 16-year-old friend because they wanted to know what it felt like. Daily Crime Archive exists to cover cases like these with the depth they deserve. The pinned comment after this video has full current status on every case. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. 6 more cases. Let's finish. Case 8. Jasmia and Tasmiyah Whitehead. Conyers, Georgia, January 2010. The Whitehead twins had been raised primarily by their great-grandmother Della, rather than their mother, Nikki. The reasons for that arrangement: Nikki's frequent absences, her difficulty maintaining stable care, were known to the family. When Nikki eventually took the twins back into her home, the transition was turbulent. The household was marked by constant conflict, strict rules, and escalating tension between a mother and daughters, who had not lived together for significant portions of their childhoods. On January 13, 2010, Jasmia and Tasmiyah Whitehead killed their mother. Nikki was 34 years old. What began as a verbal argument that morning escalated into a physical confrontation. Both twins participated in the attack. Nikki was beaten, stabbed, and held underwater until she died. After their mother was dead, the twins left for school. When they returned home later that day, they called emergency services. They presented themselves as shocked daughters who had discovered their mother's body. Their performance, their stated reactions, the story they told, was the version they maintained initially. It did not hold for long. Investigators identified inconsistencies in the twins' timeline from early in the process. Forensic analysis showed that Nikki had been dead for significantly longer than the twins' account implied. Blood patterns and physical evidence at the scene were inconsistent with their description of finding her. Then investigators found audio recordings from inside the family car. Conversations between the twins about what had happened. The recordings became central evidence in establishing their knowledge and participation. Both eventually confessed. Jasmia told investigators, "I'm sorry. It was just confusion and turmoil. The legal proceedings focused on the distinction between a planned killing and one that arose from an escalating situation. Both twins ultimately pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter rather than first-degree murder, a plea that acknowledged the serious nature of what they had done while recognizing it had not been premeditated in the way that would constitute murder under Georgia law. Each received a sentence of 30 years. The sentencing took place in 2014, 4 years after Nikki's death. The twins had been honor students before this. Teachers and friends described young women who had shown academic promise and social ability. The dissonance between who they had appeared to be and what they had done remained a central element of how the community processed the case. As of 2025, Tasmia Whitehead is at Arendelle State Prison and is scheduled for parole consideration in March 2026. Jasmia is at Pulaski State Prison with parole eligibility in September 2027. Whether either will be granted parole remains to be determined. Case 9. Nahir Galarza, Gualeguaychú, Argentina, December 2017. This case requires presenting both the prosecution's established case and the ongoing legal complexity, because collapsing the controversy into a simple guilty verdict would misrepresent the actual state of the case. Nahir Galarza was 19 years old when she was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment for the death of her 20-year-old boyfriend, Fernando Pastorizo. She became the youngest woman in Argentina to receive a life sentence, and her case has remained contested in ways that have not resolved. Fernando Pastorizo was found dead in Gualeguaychú in the early hours of December 29, 2017. He had been shot twice, once in the back, once in the chest at close range, approximately 50 centimeters. The weapon belonged to Galarza's father, a police officer. Security camera footage placed Galarza near the scene at the time. She initially gave statements to police and eventually admitted to the act. She said, "It never even crossed my mind that he was going to pass away." A statement that prosecutors presented as evidence of acknowledgement without appropriate weight. The prosecution argued the shots, particularly the second one, delivered at close range, indicated intention rather than panic. The evidence of their relationship history included text messages showing a pattern of mutual conflict and volatility. The defense raised claims of mistreatment by Pastorizo and argued the circumstances were more complicated than the prosecution's account suggested. The court rejected these arguments. The trial became a significant national media event. Galarza was young, studied law, and came from a respectable family. Observers split sharply. Some argued the evidence clearly showed intentional killing. Others argued she was being processed through a system that had a complicated relationship with how it handled young women, and that the prosecution's framing did not account for all the relevant circumstances. In 2022, Galarza made additional claims about her father's involvement in the events of that night, allegations that were investigated and did not result in changes to her conviction. In Argentina, a life sentence carries a minimum of 35 years before parole eligibility. As of 2025, Galarza is incarcerated at Penal Unit 6 in Parana. All appeals have been exhausted. She studies psychology in custody and has been described in some media coverage as focused and composed. A request she made to use phones and social media, citing exemplary conduct, was denied and generated significant public controversy. Fernando Pastorizo was 20 years old. His family has continued seeking closure in the years since his death, while the legal and public debate about the circumstances continues. Case 10. Anissa Weier and Morgan Geyser. Waukesha, Wisconsin, May 2014. Peyton Leutner was 12 years old. So were Anissa Weier and Morgan Geyser, her classmates and friends. On May 31, 2014, the three of them went into the woods near a park in Waukesha, Wisconsin, ostensibly to play. Weier and Geyser attacked Peyton with a knife, stabbing her 19 times. The wounds covered her arms, legs, and torso. Several came within millimeters of a major artery. The two girls left her in the woods, believing she wouldn't survive. She crawled out of the woods to a path. A cyclist found her. She survived. The stated motivation for the attack was a fictional internet character called Slender Man, a tall, faceless figure created in online forums that depicted stories of supernatural harm. Weier and Geiser had spent months immersed in this content. At some point, the boundary between the fiction and their understanding of reality had broken down entirely. They had come to believe Slender Man was real, and that they were required to prove their loyalty to him by killing someone. They chose their friend because she was accessible and trusted them. When police found Weier and Geiser walking along a highway with the weapon, the girls explained their motivation matter-of-factly. Their calm description of the Slender Man belief system and the necessity of the attack was, by investigators' accounts, one of the most unusual disclosures they had encountered. Psychiatric evaluation established significant differences between the two. Geiser was diagnosed with early-onset schizophrenia. She had been experiencing hallucinations and delusions for years before the attack, and her psychiatric condition was central to understanding her disconnection from reality in the period leading to May 2014. Weier did not have the same diagnosis and appeared, with time, to develop a clearer understanding of what they had done and why it was wrong. Both were charged as adults initially. Both ultimately pleaded guilty to attempted homicide and were committed to mental health institutions rather than traditional prisons, with treatment as the primary framework for their time in custody. Weier received a 25-year commitment. Geiser received 40 years. Weier was released in 2021. She remains under supervision until 2039. In July 2025, Geiser was conditionally released to a group home following years of treatment and multiple previously denied release requests. She will remain under supervision until 2058. Peyton Leutner survived. In a remarkable development documented in 2019, she publicly thanked Geiser, specifically the experience of surviving the attack, for inspiring her to pursue a career in medicine. She described turning the trauma into something she could move forward with. Case 11. Hope Rippy, Madison, Indiana, January 1992. This is the oldest case on this list, and it remains one of the most extensively discussed examples of how teenage group dynamics can escalate into collective violence. Shonda Scherer was 12 years old when she was killed on January 11, 1992, by a group of 4 teenagers. The ringleader was a girl named Melinda Loveless. Her driving motivation was jealousy, a romantic situation that had become, in her mind, an obsession requiring elimination of its source. Hope Rippy was 15 years old. She was one of the 4. The others were Loveless, Lori Tackett, and Tony Lawrence. The group lured Shonda from her home under false pretenses late on the night of January 10th. They had her in their vehicle. What followed lasted for hours. Shonda was subjected to sustained physical harm before being burned in a field. The autopsy documented the full scope of what she had endured. The forensic evidence was extensive. The investigation broke open when Rippy and Lawrence gave statements to police that described what had happened and who had done what. These accounts became central to establishing the sequence of events and the individual roles within it. Rippy's role, as established at legal proceedings, was considered somewhat less active than Loveless's and Tackett's, but she had participated in luring Shonda, had been present throughout, and had made statements during the ordeal that were documented and played a significant role in how the public and the legal system understood her culpability. She received a sentence of 60 years, later reduced. The reduction reflected cooperation with investigators and her somewhat lesser role relative to the primary actors. Rippy was released from prison in 2006, having served 14 years. She remained on parole until 2011. As of 2025, no further public information about her is available. In 2011, she appeared on the Dr. Phil program alongside Shonda Scherer's mother, a confrontation that drew national attention and was described by those who watched it as deeply emotional and difficult. Shanda Scherer was 12 years old. Case 12. Sarah Anne Colb. East Moline, Illinois, January 2005. Adrienne Reynolds had recently moved to the area. She was trying to make friends. She reached out to Sarah Anne Colb. She wrote to her asking, "Why do you hate me so much?" She knew there was tension. She didn't know the depth of the danger. Sarah Anne Colb had developed feelings for a young man named Corey Gregory. When Gregory showed interest in Adrienne instead, Colb's jealousy built to the point where she began planning Adrienne's death. Investigators later found Colb's journal, which contained threats against Adrienne, documentation of a premeditated intention that predated the day of the killing. On January 21, 2005, Colb and Gregory convinced Adrienne to skip school with them. They drove to a parking lot. Colb strangled Adrienne with a belt. What followed showed a level of calculation that went beyond the killing itself. They attempted to burn Adrienne's body. When that was unsuccessful, they used a saw to dismember her remains and disperse the parts across different locations. The investigation gained traction when Gregory provided information about where remains could be found. The forensic evidence, combined with the journal entries and Gregory's testimony, built a comprehensive case. At trial, Colb attempted to position herself as an unwilling participant, someone carried along by Gregory's actions rather than a central actor. The evidence did not support that account. The journal contradicted it directly. The nature of the concealment, the dismemberment, the disposal, pointed to someone who had been an active participant in every stage. The first trial ended in a mistrial. The eventual conviction resulted in a sentence of 53 years. In recent years, Colb, now known as Shane and identifying as male, sought resentencing, arguing that sentences given to young offenders should be reconsidered in light of subsequent legal developments around juvenile sentencing. In 2023, an appellate court denied this request, finding no Eighth Amendment violation and determining the original sentence was appropriate. As of 2025, Colb is at Logan Correctional Center in Illinois. All appeals have been denied. Release is not projected until well into the future. Adrienne Reynolds was trying to make friends in a new place. She wrote a note asking why someone hated her. She never got an answer that made any sense.